안녕하세요.
It was a rainy Monday morning in Seoul when Yoon Tae-hyun, the cold and calculating CEO of Hanjin Group, arrived at the company's glass tower in Gangnam. Known for his ruthless business acumen and icy demeanor, Tae-hyun commanded fear and admiration in equal measure. Inside the building, employees straightened their backs as he passed, never daring to meet his gaze. On the 47th floor, where the executive offices loomed like a forbidden fortress, few ever ventured unless summoned. But fate, as it often does, cared little for protocol. Downstairs in the lobby, a young woman adjusted her employee badge for the third time that morning. "Ugh, come on, Soo-jin," she muttered to herself, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's just a temp job. You've handled worse." Lee Soo-jin, recently hired as an administrative assistant, was filling in for someone on maternity leave. She was used to being invisible, her world made of second-hand cardigans, late buses, and discounted lunches. Still, something about this building made her nervous, as if she were stepping into a different universe entirely. As the elevator doors slid open, she took a deep breath and entered. The elevator hummed softly as it rose, stopping unexpectedly on the 30th floor. The doors opened, and in stepped none other than Tae-hyun himself, flanked by his executive secretary. Soo-jin's eyes widened as she instinctively stepped back. The CEO stood tall in a charcoal suit, his sharp eyes scanning the space without emotion. His secretary whispered, "47th, sir," and pressed the button. "Tin Zilengse." Soo-jin kept her eyes glued to the floor, hoping not to attract attention, but the universe had other plans. As the elevator jolted between floors, it came to a sudden halt. The lights flickered, and the soft hum ceased. Panic briefly flickered in Soo-jin's chest. She glanced sideways. Tae-hyun raised a brow but remained calm. "Do you always tremble in elevators, or is it just my presence?" he asked dryly, voice rich and smooth. She blinked, caught off guard. "And no, sir. Just elevators. And you. I mean not you but you being here, makes it different." A corner of his mouth twitched, almost imperceptibly. "You work here?" "Yes, sir. Temporary staff. Admin pool. Just for a few weeks." Bravery comes in small packages these days," he said, turning away as if the conversation was already forgotten. But something about her awkward honesty intrigued him, like a smudge on glass he couldn't ignore. Before long, the elevator powered back to life, and they reached the 47th floor. As he stepped out, Tae-hyun paused briefly and turned. "Soo-jin, was it? You're not as invisible as you think." And just like that, he disappeared into the high corridors of power, leaving Soo-jin staring in stunned silence as the doors closed behind him. A week had passed since the unexpected elevator incident, and yet the brief encounter lingered in both their minds. For Soo-jin, it was a surreal memory she replayed with equal parts embarrassment and curiosity. For Tae-hyun, it was a quiet disruption to his rigid world, an anomaly he couldn't categorize. He found himself noticing things he never had before: the subtle chatter of the lower floors, the clinking of coffee mugs, the rare laughter echoing up the stairwells. And somewhere beneath it all, the soft voice of a temporary assistant who wasn't afraid to stutter in his presence. The HR department, desperate to impress, organized a company-wide wellness week. Departments were paired randomly to encourage cross-level synergy. Much to everyone's disbelief, the executive office was matched with the administrative support pool for a team-building workshop. Tae-hyun almost declined, until he saw Soo-jin's name among the participants. The event was held in the conference lounge on the 18th floor. Tae-hyun arrived late, entering with his usual air of detachment. He scanned the room, then paused when he spotted her. Soo-jin sat near the corner, nervously flipping through the printed itinerary. Her cardigan sleeves were rolled up just enough to reveal a thin bracelet. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave a quick, startled nod. "Partner activity," the coach declared. "You'll pair up with someone you've never spoken to at length before. Choose now." Murmurs filled the room. Soo-jin looked around in a panic. Everyone was pairing fast. Before she could move, a shadow fell over her.
Taken.
Taehyun asked, his voice soft but authoritative. She nearly choked.
No.
I mean yes, wait, I mean please sit. He settled beside her, glancing at the worksheet. Trust-building exercises.
Ho Trilling.
She gave a nervous laugh. I'm not sure how much trust you can build in 10 minutes. Depends who you're trusting, he replied, and for the second time, Soo-jin caught the hint of a smirk. Their activity was absurd, one partner blindfolded, the other guiding them across a taped maze on the floor. When it was his turn to wear the blindfold, Soo-jin hesitated. I don't want to make you trip, sir. I trust you, he said simply, holding out his hand. The moment was oddly intimate. She led him carefully, her voice quiet but confident. When he stumbled slightly, her hand brushed his arm, a fleeting touch, but enough to stir something unspoken. At the end, when the game concluded, Taehyun removed the blindfold and looked at her more intently than before. You didn't let me fall. No, sir. He nodded once. Then maybe this wasn't such a waste of time after all. And for the first time in years, he chose to remain after the event, seated quietly beside her as the room buzzed around them. The first signs of trouble came quietly, like cracks beneath polished marble. It started with whispers in the boardroom and escalated to subtle accusations from executives who didn't appreciate the CEO's sudden interest in a temp. Taehyun, usually immune to gossip, found himself at the center of a quiet storm. His attention toward Soo-jin hadn't gone unnoticed, and his enemies within the company, long waiting for a sign of weakness, finally had their opening. It was during the quarterly leadership review that the tension boiled over. Taehyun had proposed a restructuring plan that threatened to cut profits for certain senior partners. One of them, Mr. Kong, leaned back in his chair and spoke with a calculated smile. Perhaps instead of romantic distractions with junior staff, our CEO should focus on protecting the company's core interests.
The room froze.
Taehyun's gaze sharpened, but his voice remained cold. Speak plainly, Kong. Rumors travel fast, Kong continued. A CEO seen fraternizing with a temporary assistant. Some might see that as compromising. Laughter rippled through the table, some forced, others genuine.
Taehyun said nothing more.
But his silence wasn't submission. It was fury held tightly behind a mask of composure. He ended the meeting early and left without another word. Behind him, Kong smiled with satisfaction. Later that evening, Taehyun stood alone in his office, staring out at the Seoul skyline.
The city lights flickered like stars too far away to touch.
The words lingered in his mind, not for their cruelty, but for the risk they posed to Soo-jin. His life could weather scandal, but hers? She didn't belong to this world of daggers behind smiles and loyalty traded like stocks. His phone buzzed. It was his mother. I heard unsettling things, she said without greeting.
You're getting sloppy.
Do you know what people are saying? Yes, he replied curtly.
You're the hire of the Hanyin legacy, not a schoolboy chasing whims. Entity now.
He hung up without answering. That night, he made a difficult choice.
Not for the board.
Not for his mother. For her. The next morning, Soo-jin arrived at work to find an envelope on her desk. Inside, a formal notice. Her assignment had been concluded early. No explanation. Just 2 weeks of severance and a note from HR. Her fingers trembled as she reread it, heart sinking. She felt blindsided, betrayed. Confused and heartbroken, she marched to the executive floor, ignoring the wide eyes of staff as she knocked on Taehyun's door. The receptionist tried to stop her, but she pushed through. He opened it himself. His expression unreadable. You ended my contract, she asked, voice shaking. Why? His silence was a blade. I asked you a question, she continued. Was I just a distraction? He looked away. It's better this way. For who? For both of us. She blinked rapidly, nodding as she backed away. I thought, never mind. He didn't move as she turned and walked away, each step echoing like judgment. The door closed gently, but the sound echoed louder than any slam. Inside, Taehyun sat down, jaw clenched, the weight of his decision pressing harder than he expected. He had protected her, but in doing so, he'd also broken something that might never mend. He looked at the chair where she had once sat during the team-building event, and for the first time, his office felt cold in a way even he couldn't control. Outside, Soo-jin stood in the lobby, clutching her envelope. People moved around her like she didn't exist. Again. But this time, it wasn't invisibility she felt. It was abandonment.
Seasons come and go, oh, our love will always grow. Through the storms and gentle rain, we'll bloom and start again. You're my eternal bloom, a rose that breaks the gloom. In your arms I'm home, never again.